Hello and welcome to this build guide video for Kerbal Space Program 2 for Science. So this is the rocket we are going to build. It's quite a hefty piece of kit is this, and I'm actually going to be using this to go to Tylo and do the Tylo Monument mission. Now before we get into it, I do have a little bit of a confession to make. This, as I say, is a big rocket with quite a lot of parts, and as a result it's a bit of a performance killer with the game. I've been noticing that the game runs around about half speed for the first portion of the actual mission, and the frame rate in some places are absolutely abysmal. I think I got down to about 4 or 5 frames at one point, which obviously isn't brilliant. So if that kind of thing bothers you, then this might not be the rocket for you. I have seen videos of people using much smaller and simpler rockets. However, I was determined to take a large lander, and as a result I've actually been torturing myself a little bit over the past few days building this thing, because it's been such a nightmare actually building it and testing it and getting it there, especially with the game running the way it has been. But anyway, as I say, yeah, this is what we're going to be taking to Tylo, so I'll just take you through the rocket before we get into the build. So as you can see, we have our lander at the top, and like I say, this is a large lander, something I've not seen anybody else doing just yet. They always do small landers or the odd maybe medium one, so I might even be the first person to do a large lander to Tylo in Kerbal Space Program 2 at the moment. But anyway, yeah, like I say, this is the lander we're going to be using, and there's a couple of key features with this lander. The first feature is it's actually carrying a rover, because I've found that, well, quite often I'll end up overshooting the target or not necessarily getting down as accurately as I would like. So I've decided to put a rover on this, so that if we do land a bit far away from the target, we can just drive to it, and also we can leave this rover on the surface afterwards, and then if we need to ever get any more science in the future, we can leave the top stage in orbit, which is going to essentially become a relay satellite, at which point we'll then be able to drive the rover around and get more science. The other key feature with this lander as well is that it uses what's called Asparagus Staging, and that basically means that throughout the descent burn we are going to be burning these tanks, or emptying these tanks first and then decoupling them and getting rid of them. Then we'll empty these tanks and get rid of those, then those tanks, and then finally we'll get onto the actual main tank on the bottom stage of the rocket. And the eagle-eyed amongst you may also notice that I'm actually using solid fuel boosters on this rocket as well, and the main purpose of those is just to get us out of our orbit around Tylo into a suborbital trajectory, at which point we'll then use the actual main engines to get us down. But yeah, that is the lander, and then of course we have the next stage, which this stage is basically intended to do our final orbital maneuvers around Tylo and then get us back to Kerbin. The next stage will perform the majority of the gravity assists around Joule to actually get into Tylo, and then the next stage will probably do a couple of gravity assists, but that is primarily going to get us into orbit around Joule, and also do most of our transfer maneuver. And then of course we have the biggest stage of all, and by far the more complicated stage, although it's not as complicated as the actual lander is, but it's still fairly complicated because once again we have multiple side boosters, and these boosters are also going to use a Asparagus staging setup as well. So we'll be getting rid of the front and back boosters first, then the solid boosters will go, followed by the side boosters. But like I say, we'll get into that later on in the actual build. And the other key feature with this stage of the rocket is the side boosters, you may have noticed, actually have 7 engines on each booster. Now I've done that because it gives you more thrust. You actually essentially get the the combined thrust of all of these engines put together, and I think that might be one of the reasons why it's been running so badly, but I've been able to tolerate it, so if I can tolerate it, I'm sure you can. But anyway, like I said, this is the rocket we're going to build. It is a large Tylo lander, like I mentioned, and we are going to need to buy quite a bit of tech to actually get this. So first thing we'll do is we will go to the research and development building and buy all the tech we need. So we'll start off by buying monopropellant drive and tiny engines. And then in tier 2, we want to buy nuclear propulsion, modular launchers, and we will also want to buy precision propulsion as well, because we want the spider engine from that. And I believe that is everything we need from tier 2. So in tier 3, we'll get heavy rocketry. We are also going to grab deep space probes and enlarged power systems. We're also going to go all the way up to large payloads because we need that for the rover. And we also want the large reaction wheel as well, so we'll grab large aerodynamics. And then the rest of it is we're going to go all the way up to heavy nuclear propulsion, grabbing the heavy orbital operations on the way. And like I said, this should actually use the vast majority of our science. So you can see we only have 131 science left, which would only, well, I mean, it'll allow us to finish off tier 1, but that's pretty much all we'd be able to do with that. But we're going to leave that and do this mission. So yeah, let's get into the actual build itself. So we're actually going to start with the lander for this build because it is by far the most complicated part of the rocket, and as I mentioned, it does utilise asparagus staging as well, so I'll try and explain how that works. But anyway, first of all, we'll go to command and we will grab the large Wanderer 4-seat lander can, and then on top of this, if we go to structures, we can grab the medium RM adapter plate and put that there. And then for this, we're also going to go back to command and grab the small remote guidance unit. And we're using a guidance unit on this because, as I mentioned, we are actually going to be leaving the top half of this lander in space once we're done with it around Tylo as a kind of relay satellite. So naturally, we need to also add a docking port. So we'll go to coupling and grab the Clamptron docking port and pop that there. And then underneath this, what we're going to do is we'll go to utility. We'll grab the large reaction wheel, and for the fuel tank we're going to grab the large S3 3600 Methalox tank, and then we are only going to use one small, well I say small engine, one vector engine on the bottom of this. So what we're going to need to do before we put the engine on is actually put the large engine mount on as well, and that will give us the second node, which will allow us to actually get the proper fairing. So as I was saying, we want to use one vector engine on the bottom of here, and that is more than enough to actually get us back into orbit around Tylo. And then we're going to go to coupling and grab the large stack decoupler, and we need to make sure that it's connected to the actual node for the engine plate and not the engine, because if we do that, you can see we get the wrong fairing type. So we'll make sure it's there. Then we'll right click on the engine mount and reduce the height just to actually make sure the engine is just inside of the actual fairing. And then we're going to use the same fuel tank again for the next stage. So we'll grab the S3 3600, and this is where we're actually going to put the lander. So for that, what we'll do is we'll start off by going to payloads, and we're going to grab 2 of the CBS 375 cargo bays and pop them just to the side, and we'll pop one on top of the other. Then if we open the top one, what we can now do is if we go to load, we can find the rover, and we did actually build this rover in the separate build guide because I didn't want to have to do it in this video because it would have added even more time to the build. So we'll hit the merge button, and that will actually merge it into this project. Now the thing about this is because we did this rover in flat orientation, what happens is when we move the camera around, it jumps about and it's really irritating. So we're going to make sure that the workspace orientation is set to up, and then if we grab the decoupler, we're going to make sure that this is actually connected to the top inside node of the actual cargo bay. So we're actually having a little bit of trouble with that, so I'm going to decouple or get rid of the second one just to make sure that we are only using the one. We'll grab the rover again, and we should be able to get this in position. It can be a little bit iffy for some reason. See, what's happening there is it's actually connecting the reaction wheel for some reason, so I'm going to pop it there for now, and I'm actually going to just use the rotate and translate tool to move it up. And then of course we want to pop this one back on the bottom of the actual cargo bay. So let's make sure everything is in the right position, and that looks pretty decent to me. So yeah, we can now close that cargo bay, and we can put this entire thing on the bottom of the rocket itself. we might even be able to move it up a little bit because it doesn't really matter that the wheels are sticking out like that, but it looks a little bit silly. So I'm just going to grab the rotate and translate tool and just move the entire thing up just a little bit. There we go, that looks better. So obviously we need some landing legs for this, and I have found that if we were to add the landing legs straight onto the cargo bay, then they can be a little bit iffy because then essentially the front two aren't really connected to anything. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to go to structures and we are going to grab the medium M-beam 200 and we're going to pop 4 of these on the side of the fuel tank. And it can get a bit iffy because there are so many different nodes now, so we'll make sure that it is flat. And then we should be able to get it in position eventually, but we'll go to 4 times symmetry. And eventually we should actually be able to get it where we want it to be. So there we go, that's what we want. So yeah, what we'll do now is we will rotate it so that the flat side is facing up. And then we're going to go to ground and grab the medium wombat landing legs. And if you have the large landing legs, then you could use those for this, but we only have the medium ones at the minute, which is why I'm doing it like this. But essentially what this is going to do now is it's going to give a structure that the landing legs are actually connected to. And also, if we were to lose the landing legs on landing, they do almost count like a second set of landing legs. So we're just going to rotate them down so they're actually where we want them to be. And then once that's done, we can get on with the actual build itself, or with the rest of the rocket, should I say. Yeah, that looks about right to me, and they do clip ever so slightly into the wheels, do the bars or beams, but that's not generally an issue. But yeah, anyway, so now that is set, we need to actually add the ladders. So we'll go to utility, and we're going to grab the medium ladder. And I did have a comment asking me how I get my ladders to work, because the person who commented couldn't actually transition between the ladders. And the only way I think that, well, the only thing that I think might be a problem is if they aren't actually overlapping, then sometimes it can be a bit dodgy trying to get them to, try to transition between each one. So what I usually do is I usually have my ladders actually overlapping one another, and that generally seems to do it. Anyway, we're going to pop 4 of these on here. We're going to pop 1 down there, and then if we extend the landing legs and the bottom ladder, we can see what the height of the ladder is doing, and we can see it really could do with going down a bit further because the gravity on Tylo is quite high and we can't really jump very high, so we need to make sure that this ladder is nice and low. And then of course we will extend all of the other ladders, and as I said, just make sure that they're actually overlapping, because as you can see the bottom of that ladder is overlapping ever so slightly with the top one, and these two are actually going to overlap quite a bit as well. One thing I would always recommend is when you are building a rocket to actually, once you put the ladders on, go to the launch pad and do a quick test just to make sure that they are actually working. So I probably will do that at some point. In fact, I'm going to quickly do that now just to make sure that everything is right. So we'll go to the runway. And now if we EVA our Kerbal, we can just drop down and make sure that everything works. So we can transfer to that one, we can transfer to that one. Yep, that one works fine. And of course the most important thing is actually being able to get back up again. So let's actually go up the ladder and make sure we can get back to the command pod. So yeah, that works perfectly fine. So sometimes you might actually need to move the ladders out a little bit away from the tank just so that you can actually get up to the door of the command pod. But yeah, that works perfectly fine. So now we'll go back to the VAB and continue the build. Okay, so yeah, of course, what we need to do now is actually close up all of the ladders. And once we've got all this set up, we will be able to go and start on the engines themselves. In fact, before we do that, what I'm going to do is I'm first of all going to right click on the landing legs and hit auto suspension and max the string strength and damper strength out. And then I'm also going to go into the action group manager. We'll go to gear, and then if we go to utilities, we can actually find all of the ladders and put them in the same group as the landing gear, because that means that when it comes to lowering the landing gear, the ladders will also extend as well, and that just means we don't have to right click on them individually and do it manually. But yeah, so now that's done, we can close up the landing legs, and we're just going to do a couple more things before we actually get onto the engines as well, because as I say, we are going to be turning this into essentially a relay satellite. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go to communication and grab the Communitron HD55 and pop one of these on here. And we're using that one because it has an 86 gigameter range, and that means we can actually communicate back to Kerbal from orbit around Joule/Tylo. So we'll get that in position. And then we're also going to need some power generation, so we'll go to electrical, grab the Z400 rechargeable battery and pop 2 of these on the side here. And we're also going to use the OX10C solar panels and pop them on the top there. So yeah, now that is set, we just need to get into the actual engines and tanks. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go to fuel tanks. We'll grab the FLT 400 Methalox tank, and we're going to pop 2 of these on the side of the bottom tank. And then we'll obviously also add a couple of nose cones to them. And then on the bottom of these, we're going to use the Vector engine again. So that means basically we have radially mounted engines, because obviously having the rover on the bottom of the lander means we can't actually, have engines on the bottom of it. So anyway, now we are going to get into the actual Asparagus tanks, and as I say, it's not the most complicated thing to do once you actually understand it, but the first thing we'd do is we'll actually build one of the tanks first, and then we can just duplicate them all the way around. So we'll go to fuel tanks, we'll grab the FLT 800 tank and pop that there, and then we'll pop a nose cone on the top of that one. And then on the bottom of this, we are actually going to put some solid boosters as well, so we can deorbit from orbit around Tylo. So we'll put a small decoupler there, and then we're going to go to engines, and we're going to grab the hammer engine, and we'll put one of these on the bottom as well. And now another thing that I like to do with these engines, because when we come to actually doing the burn, we won't know what the actual fuel level is in these side tanks unless we use the resource transfer menu. So what we can do is we can actually add a small spider engine onto the side of it. And what that will do is it will bring up the actual fuel level on the staging stack. The spider engines aren't really going to make any difference, but like I say, if the fuel is on the staging stack, then it makes it much easier to stage at the correct time. And also, if we right click on them and reduce the thrust limiter to 1%, then it's not really going to be using any of the fuel in the tank. However, we will get the noise to tell us that we have actually, the tank has emptied. So yeah, that is that tank set. So now we are going to actually start putting them on the rocket. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go to coupling, we'll grab the TT38X medium radial decoupler, and we're going to pop 2 of these on the side here. Then we'll grab this and pop that on there. Of course, we need to move the engine a bit as well, so that it's on the correct side. And then we're actually going to have 2 tanks here, so we'll alt and click on the main tank, and then we'll pop another one on the side of this one. And what I'm also going to do is I'm just going to actually use the rotate and translate tool to move it around so it's actually symmetrical. And then what we can do is we can use the rotate and translate tool again to move both tanks to the side. And then we'll just move them in a couple of notches as well, just so that it actually looks right. Yeah, that looks pretty central to me. So now what we'll do, we are going to put the same tanks essentially, but only one this time on these sides. So we'll pop 2 small decouplers on the side tanks there, and then we'll pop another 2 there. And then we will alt and click on the one tank which is separate from the 2, because we only want to be using 1 for this. So we'll grab that, we'll pop that on there, and we'll do the same on this side as well. And now what we need to do to actually make this an asparagus stage is we need to actually set up the fuel lines. So we'll go to fuel tanks and grab the fuel line. And the idea with asparagus staging is that we want to be actually decoupling two tanks, or one pair of tanks first, and then onto the next ones. But I'll explain how it works. So, as I say, if we I'm just going to reset this. If we grab the fuel line, we're going to put a fuel line leading from these tanks to those tanks, and then we will have another fuel line leading from this tank to the next pair of tanks. And as you can see, I have set them up in pairs so that it'll work properly, whereas if we were to just do like any other symmetry mode, it wouldn't really work. So if you do it in pairs, it's much easier. But anyway, like I say, then we'll make sure that the final tank is actually going from the tank to the bottom tank of the actual lander itself. And that basically means that as we are burning, these tanks will empty first, and once they're empty, we will decouple them, which will then leave these tanks to empty next, which obviously once they're emptied, we'll get rid of those, and then those tanks will empty finally before we go onto the main tank on the stage. And it just means that we're actually losing the weight of the spent tanks as we're actually burning. And it just, like I say, theoretically it makes it more efficient. So we'll just move these into a better position. So yeah, that is the lander itself done. So what we'll do then is we will grab this, and we're actually going to pop it to the side for the time being and build the main rocket. So firstly, we'll grab the Cockatoo large command pod and pop that over here. And then if we hit the little symbol above it, that will change the launch assembly to this one. And then obviously we first of all need to put a docking port on the top here. So we'll go to coupling, grab the clampetron and pop that there. And as with any of my rockets, I'm going to pop 3 drogue parachutes and 3 main parachutes on the top. So we'll grab the Mark 12R radial and pop 3 of these on here. And then we will grab the Mark 16 and pop 3 of those underneath it. And then I'm just going to go into action groups and set these up so that the main ones will deploy at the same time as the drogue ones cut. Yeah, now that is done, we are also going to add a little sniffer as well, because there is a potential chance that we might be able to do some more science around Joule. So we'll pop that there, and then naturally we also need to grab a or put a heat shield on the bottom. So we'll grab the large heat shield and put that there, and then of course we are going to grab the large decoupler and plonk that on there. And then under here, what we'll do is we'll go to utility, and we'll start off by putting the large reaction wheel on, because we're essentially going to have 1 reaction wheel per stage. And even with that many reaction wheels, it's still very sluggish when we're trying to do maneuvers. So yeah, the more reaction wheels, the better. Although, of course, this rocket does have quite a high part count, so I'm trying to keep it as low as possible. But anyway, yeah, like I say, we'll pop the reaction wheel there. Then we'll go to fuel tanks. We're going to grab the medium monopropellant tank and put that on there, and then we're actually going to just move it up so that it is inside of the actual reaction wheel. And then underneath this, we're going to make this into a nuclear stage. So we'll grab the large hydrogen fuel tank and put that on the bottom of the methalox tank. And of course, we're going to move this up. I've just realised one thing that I have forgotten is we do need to actually add a fairing on this, because as you might have seen, the lander is actually going to be sitting upside down on top of this rocket, and that would cause a hell of a lot of drag without a fairing. So I'm actually going to grab the reaction wheel, and I'm going to go to payload, and we're going to put the large muzzle fairing on there as well, just so that when we're ready we can actually build the fairing up. But anyway, like I say, we'll do that later. So for this, we are going to add some more fuel tanks, just so that we actually have plenty of fuel to actually get back to Kerbin. So we'll go back to fuel, and we're going to grab the small hydrogen fuel tank. And I'm going to pop 2 of these on the side here. And we're doing it in 2 radial at the moment, or 2 symmetry, because I want to add some solar panels onto these too. And if we were to do higher radial or symmetry, then we'd end up adding more solar panels. So anyway, like I say, we'll go to electrical, we'll grab the Gigantor solar panel, and I'm just going to flip these so they are pointed up because it just looks right to me. It feels like if we had it the other way, then the aero effect could potentially break them. Obviously, that won't actually happen in the game, but it's just something I like to do. And then while we're here, we might as well also add a couple of Z400 rechargeable batteries as well. Now, naturally, we are going to need some aerodynamics on this, so we will grab the small nose cone and pop 2 of those on the top and 2 of these on the bottom. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to just basically put 4 more of these tanks on the side. So I'm going to alt click on that. I'm going to go to 4 symmetry, and then I'm just going to get rid of the actual solar panels from those. And naturally, we also need some RCS control as well. So we'll go to utility and grab the RV105s. We'll pop 2 of these on here. Pop another 2 at the bottom. And then we're just going to pop 2 on these ones as well. And that way we should have a full range of RCS control. And naturally, as I always do, I'm going to right click on the RCS thrusters, go to advanced controls and turn off pitch and yaw, so that if we leave the RCS on while we're trying to point at the maneuvers, it won't mess up our orbit. And yeah, we should be able to get relatively accurate maneuvers. So one thing I often forget to do is I'll do it on the RCS thrusters, but sometimes I forget to also do it on the command pod, because the command pod also has RCS thrusters. So we're going to go into here and do the exact same thing, just so that that doesn't affect our orbit either. So yeah, that is that stage, or the fuel tanks ready on that stage. So now we just need to add the engine. So we'll go to engines and grab the large swerve engine and pop that on the bottom there. So now for the next stage, we'll grab the large decoupler again, put that there, and then we are going to go to fuel tanks. We're going to grab the S3 14400 and put that underneath. And for the engine on this stage, we're actually going to use the tuber engine. And the tuber engine is a very high ISP, but quite a low thrust, thrust in vacuum. So it takes a long time to do burns with this engine, but it does mean that we have a lot more delta V in this stage if we were to than if we were to use something like, say, well, I mean, technically, well, yeah, any of the other engines, really. So anyway, that's the engine we're going to use for this one. And now it is going to, well, it's starting to get a bit short now, or close to the ground. So because it's quite a tall rocket, I'm also going to just move it up a bit so that we've got plenty of space underneath to actually create the rest of the core stage. So anyway, yeah, we'll go back to coupling. We'll grab the large decoupler again. And then for this tank, we are going to use the S3 7200 and another 14400, and underneath that we are going to use the Mammoth 2 engine. And then this is the last main stage of the core section of the rocket. So for this, we're just going to go back to tanks and use 2 S3 28800s. And on the bottom of this, we are going to pop another Mammoth engine. So as you can see, it's still quite tall. Now, one little trick I would mention is that it can be really awkward trying to adjust the height of a rocket when it's so tall. So instead of having to try and go all the way up to the command pod and move it that way, what we can do is we can actually go to the assembly anchor button and select the bottom tank as the assembly anchor, and then we can just move it up. And it just makes it much easier to actually adjust the height of a rocket when it's getting quite tall like this one is. Of course, when we do that, we do need to make sure that we actually then change the assembly anchor back to the command pod. But yeah, so that is the core stage ready, and now it's time for the side boosters. And the side boosters are slightly more complicated, but they use roughly the same tank formation. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to build these separately as well, and then we'll pop them on the side, because these are going to be Asparagus staged also. So we'll go back to tanks, we'll grab the S3 14400, then we're going to grab another 2800 and pop that on the bottom, and another one on the top. And for the actual nose cone, what we could do, I mean, there's a couple of options here. We could use the large nose cone, but that is 1.2 tons, whereas if we were to go to payloads and grab the cargo nose, that's only 0.293 tons, and personally I think it looks better, so I'm going to pop that on the top there. And then I am going to, for the engines, this is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated because we're going to use a multi-engine setup. And there is a good reason I'm doing this. If we were to just use 4 mammoth engines, the thrust to weight isn't quite high enough. So what we'll do is we'll go to structure, we'll grab the large engine mount and pop that on there, and then we are going to basically do 7 engines. I was originally designing this rocket as almost like a Falcon 7 heavy type thing, because each stage had 7 engines, but it wasn't enough. So anyway, enough of the rambling. So we'll go to the vector, we'll pop 1 in the middle there, and then we're going to pop 2 on either side of it, and we're doing it like this because we want these engines to gimbal, but we don't want the outside engines to gimbal. So what we'll do is we'll put another 2 out here, and I'm actually going to go to radial symmetry for this because it makes it a little bit easier to judge their actual position in relation to one another. So we'll pop 2 there, we'll pop another 2 here. And then, as I say, we don't want these engines to actually gimbal, so we're going to right click on them and we're going to turn off gimbal on these engines. It just means that it's a little bit more controllable if only the centre 3 engines actually gimbal, because I found with all 7 engines gimbaling it can, cause some issues. But anyway, what I would normally do now is I would normally add a load of separation motors, but the part count on this rocket is already going to be quite high. So there is another thing we can do when it comes to separating the engines. Obviously we could just leave them as they are, but there are a couple of things I'll show you. And for this one, what we're going to do is we're going to open the cargo bay, and then we're actually going to go to fuel tanks and grab a small Stratus 5 mini-field monopropellant tank and pop one of these in the middle here. And then if we go to engines, we can grab the puff engine and pop one of these on there. And then what that's going to do is if we right click on it and then go to independent throttle and set that to full, then when we decouple, that engine will fire and it'll push the top away from the rocket. It doesn't push it away very hard, but it's just enough to make sure that it's not actually going to risk flying back in and hitting the main engine. So yeah, like I say, we'll do that on these 4 rockets, and we're doing that on these ones because those are monopropellant tanks. But I'm actually going to show you another way when we get to the solid fuel boosters. But anyway, we actually need to attach these to the main rocket. So once again, this is going to be essentially an asparagus setup. So we'll go to coupling, we'll grab the medium decoupler, and we'll pop 2 on the core stage there. Then we're going to grab this engine or this tank and pop that onto the actual decoupler and make sure it's properly central. We also need to just make sure that the actual engines or the puff engines are going to be pointed in the right direction, because as you can see we didn't position them quite in the right place. So if we, well, let's see if it's connected to this first. So we'll use the rotate and translate tool to turn the actual nose cone around, and yeah, it connected it to the actual tank itself. So we just need to move the puff engine to this side and that will do the trick. Okay, we'll close that one back up, and then what we'll do is we will alt and click on the decoupler and we'll move another 2 onto this side. And the way that this is going to work is that once the first 2 engines on the front and back of the rocket have emptied, those will decouple and then will be onto the side engines. So obviously we need to set up the actual fuel lines for this. So we'll go to fuel tanks again, and just as we did before, we're going to have the fuel lines coming from the front 2 tanks into the side tanks, and then we'll have the fuel line running from the side tank into the main core stage. And like I say, that just means that the front tanks will empty first, then these tanks will empty next, and then we'll be onto the core stage. And we should actually use all of the fuel in the side tanks to get into a suborbital trajectory, at which point we'll only need to use these tanks to actually get us into orbit and then get us on a transfer to Joule. But yeah, that is that done. And because if we have a look at the thrust to weight ratio is not going to be exactly accurate at the moment, but the thrust to weight on this was about 0.9, I think. So we are going to need some more solid boosters just to get us off the ground. So for that, we'll go back to coupling. We'll grab the medium decoupler again, and we're actually going to pop these on the side boosters, because it turns out that the these tanks actually empty earlier than the solid tanks do. So if we pop them on the side boosters, then we know that when we get rid of the front and back boosters, we're not actually going to be losing the solid boosters early. So yeah, we'll go to engines. We're going to grab the Clydesdale boosters and pop 2 of these on here, and we'll also pop 2 of those on there. And then what we'll do is on the top of these, we're going to put the nose cone, the medium nose cone. And as I say, there is another way we could actually do the decoupling with this, or these separation motors, and we can do it on the solid boosters because they use solid fuel, whereas if we did this on the actual Metalox boosters, we'd need to isolate them from the actual booster. But I'll explain why that is the case now, because if we go to fuel tanks, we're going to grab the dumpling fuel or radial Metalox tank and pop 2 of those on there. And then if we go to engines and grab the Twitch engine, we can pop 1 of these on the top here. If we have it pointed in towards the actual rocket, then what that'll do once again is if we right click on it and set the independent throttle up, then once we stage, it will fire these engines and it'll push the tops away a little bit as well. And that's just a way to kind of reduce the number of separation motors, because with this rocket I think I had well over 60 separation motors on it when I was originally designing it, and it was absolutely killing the frame rate. So yeah, we'll do the same on this side. And I did even think of trying to put, like, you know, wings or stabilizers on the top of these and having them angled so that it would create a, you know, drag and pull them away, but it didn't quite work. It's something that's always worth a try if you feel like giving it a go. But we'll move the little Metalox tanks in. And like I say, we can do that on solid boosters because these use solid fuel, whereas if we were to do it on these boosters, we would need to actually isolate them from the booster, otherwise the main engines will actually use that fuel up and the separation motors won't work. But yeah, that is pretty much the actual full build done. So the only other thing we need to do, of course, is we need to put the lander on the top. So for that, we'll go back to the lander, and then we are going to hit the assembly anchor button and make the docking port the assembly anchor. And then if we grab that, we can flip the lander upside down, and we can now place it right on the top there. And we can do this because, well, apparently putting 2 docking ports together like that originally made it very unstable and very wobbly, but the connection is much better now in the current version of the game. So yeah, we can actually do that, and then of course we need to actually build up the fairing. So we'll pull this up, and I'm just going to do this quickly. It can be a little bit of a faff, but yeah, I'll just do this quickly, and then once that's done, we'll be ready to basically sort out the staging stack. So yeah, once this is done, we'll get into that. So obviously you can shape the fairing as, you know, to your heart's content. But yeah, that's pretty much the entire rocket done. So as I say, we just need to do the staging stack. It is going to be a little bit awkward because, as you can see, there are quite a few stages. So I might actually do that off camera. I'm also going to move things around a little bit just so that they are exactly where I want them to be. Just one last thing we can do is we can actually rotate the nose cones on the solid boosters so that they point in towards the core stage, and that just basically means that they'll fall away a little bit in a slightly nicer fall away profile, as opposed to falling away in a slightly weirder fall away profile. But like I say, these engines aren't going to have a huge effect, but it's just enough to push the top of the boosters away so that they're not going to risk actually hitting any of the engines. But yeah, anyway, now that's done, like I say, I'm just going to quickly get everything in position and then do the actual staging stack. So once that's done, we'll finish the video. So I'll see you in a second. So yeah, now I have finally got the staging stack done. It took quite a while to do because everything was all over the place, and it can be a right royal pain actually trying to organise the staging stack. But I'll take you through that in a moment because I have realised there are a few parts I've actually missed out. So one of the key things we need some more reaction wheels because this thing is very sluggish. So what we're going to do is we're actually, I think I might have mentioned it earlier, but we're going to add a reaction wheel to each stage. So I'm just going to pop one on the top of each of these stages. And then the other thing we can do, and this is something I've done before, is we could actually add some more puff engines. And the reason for that is sometimes doing small manoeuvres, we don't really want to be, we want to be conserving as much actual Methalox fuel as we want, and the RCS thrusters on their own actually aren't good enough to do, you know, certain manoeuvres. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the puff monopropellant engine, and I'm actually going to pop two of these on the bottom of the side tanks on the top stage as well. And then I'm going to just move them in so that they're actually nice and central and pointed straight down. And then what we can actually do is we can move the stage all the way to the top because we don't want to actually be activating these at any point during the mission. And then if we go to Action Group Manager, what we can then do is we can actually put these in their own action group, and that just means that if we want to do any smaller manoeuvres using the puff engines instead of the main engines, we can just activate them and deactivate them at will. So we'll go to engines, we'll find the puff engines wherever they are, and we need to make sure we're on the right ones because of course we have a few different puff engines on here at the moment. So we'll get the correct ones wherever they are. I think they're probably going to be near the bottom, aren't they? Yeah, there we are. So they're the two we actually want, and we'll just set these to toggle engine. And like I say, that just means that when we want to, we can deactivate whichever engine we are currently using, activate these ones and use those for smaller burns. Plus we have plenty of monopropellant. The other thing I'd just like to mention as well is if you want to work inside of the fairings after you've actually built it, instead of having to delete the fairing and then rebuild it, what you can do is if you right click on the fairing adapter, you can just hit the fairing enabled button and that will get rid of the fairing. But yeah, that's just a couple of extra things I just wanted to do. But anyway, like I said, that is the actual rocket. So we'll to go through the staging stack now. And like I say, it was quite complicated and it is also very specific because we need to make sure all of the stages are in the correct area so we don't end up getting rid of the wrong tanks at the wrong time. So first of all, in stage 1, we have the core stage engine and the 28 outer engines. And I think I might have mentioned it, but the reason I'm using so many of those is because we do actually get more thrust as a result. So if I move the solid boosters down and then check out the thrust to weight, sometimes it can take a little while for these things to actually catch up, but usually I believe it's about 1.2 thrust to weight. So even though it's only saying 0.8, it's not calculating it correctly. And you know what? It's because I put the wrong thing in the bottom stage, didn't I? So let's see if that recalculates it. There we go. Yeah, 1.2. So that's a good thrust to weight ratio for getting off the ground, is that. But anyway, like I say, we'll go through the actual staging stack. So in stage 1, like I say, we have all of the engines for the core stage and the side boosters. In stage 2, we have the launch clamps and the 4 solid boosters. Then in stage 3, we have the decoupler and the puff engines on the top of the front and back tanks, because like I said before, those tanks will actually empty before the solid boosters empty. It's only a few seconds difference, but it just means we can get rid of those tanks first and then the solid boosters afterwards. Then of course in the next stage we have the 4 solid booster separation motors and their decouplers. Then we have the 2 puff engines and the decouplers on the side boosters. And then the next stage, in stage 6, we have the actual fairing, because at that point we will be in a suborbital trajectory, so we'll be able to get rid of those before doing our orbital manoeuvre. Then in stage 7, we have the Mammoth 2 engine on the second stage and its decoupler. Then we've got the Tuba engine and its decoupler, followed by the nuclear engine and its decoupler. And then when it comes to the actual lander, we need to make sure that the staging is, like I say, very specific and organised correctly. So the first stage on the lander is the 8 solid boosters, obviously. Then the next stage is the 8 decouplers for the solid boosters, so we'll get rid of those. We'll also activate the 2 main engines and all of the little spider engines, and like I say, that will just mean that we'll actually know what the fuel levels are in the side tanks. And then the most important bit is making sure that we actually decouple the tanks in the correct order. So we can see we're going from those tanks to those tanks to those tanks, so we need to make sure that we're decoupling the 2 front and back tanks first, then the next set, and then the next set, because as I say, we don't want to be getting rid of any of the, well, we don't want to get rid of the wrong tanks early and end up losing the fuel. And then it's just a matter of the decoupler for the rover, so we can drop that onto the surface. Then it's the decoupler and the ascent engine, followed by the decoupler on the command module and the parachutes. And like I say, it's very specific, and it did take quite a lot of work to actually make sure it was correct, because things were all over the place. But yeah, that is the rocket we are going to be taking to Tylo. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it is a bit more of a complicated rocket. It's got a relatively high part count. At the moment it's saying 276, which I think isn't actually the highest part count I've had, but once again, as I've said, I did have well over 50 separation motors on all of the boosters, so it's a good thing to get rid of all the separation motors and just use like one thing on each to try and reduce the part count. And like I said earlier as well, it does kill the frame rate as well, does this rocket, and the mission, well, the game does run about half speed in the early parts of the mission. So like I say, if that bothers you, then this might not be the best rocket for you. There are other like missions I've seen on YouTube with people using much simpler rockets, but I was determined to take a large lander because I like torturing myself. So yeah, so this is the rocket I built to actually take the lander to Tylo, and like I say, it's the most complicated one I've done. It's also by far the biggest. We can't even zoom out and get it into the full shot without looking down on it, so I don't know how I'm going to get a thumbnail for this one. But anyway, like I say, that will be the rocket we take to Tylo, so hopefully you will tune in for that episode and see how I do that. But yeah, that's all there is for this particular video, so hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe. I'd also like it if you commented and let me know if this rocket actually works for you or if it broke your game, because well, hopefully it didn't, but I could try and do a smaller lander. If you want me to, just let me know and I'll see what I can do. But anyway, like I say, that's everything for this particular video, so hopefully I will see you in the next one.